Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out to the new data campus in Pathos Metaverse. My name is Ethan Bach, and I am the founder and board member of Denver Arts and Technology Advancement. And I'm also the founder and CEO of Ethos, who's hosting us here today. You may not heard of data, even though we've been around since 2016. But up till now, we've been doing mostly K through 12 programming in the Denver metro area. And we're all about getting kids to be creators in creative technology and not just users of it and telling their story. We've also worked with adults in creative technology and specifically in digital domes. A digital dome is like a planetarium screen with high resolution projection on it, and it's an immersive experience. And so we've had people come from all over the world to come and learn how to put their artwork in the digital dome, and then we have a show, and it's a lot of fun. And one thing that I don't have to tell you is that when it comes to what's just the changes that has happened in the last 2 years. We were really staring down, looking at opening a data center that was a physical location. And since COVID hit and everything shut down and we've reevaluated a lot of things, is we really are going to expand this idea to the virtual world like we are here today. And what we find is that this sort of connection with people has a bigger reach. It has us not just being in one geolocated location, but it has us being able to impact people around the world. And, so many students fell behind in the last year. We saw that. I saw that with my kids. It was hard for them to stay focused in virtual school. And we really think that this sort of immersive virtual space will help that to be a better option in the future. And if you've recently, you're in the workforce right now, and you're in a traditional workforce, a lot of people are using virtual and remote resources for the workforce. And the way that we see this set up is ways in which students can step into that new workforce as well, and for it to be seamless. So here we are. We're in the virtual world, and here we are learning from each other. And I hope you enjoy yourself, because we have a lineup of amazing speakers for you. And here to set them up for you and to moderate is our own Gavin Culberson. And he is a board member with Data since early 2020. And along with Hassa and myself, we are the core team that is reshaping our organization for the goals in a post-pandemic world. And Gavin is currently a senior project manager at Wonderman Thompson, which is a creative data and technology-driven agency. And he also has a long history in creative technology, including directing a feature film and creating various interactive media exhibitions. And he once turned a yurt into an immersive theater for the holidays. So let's give it up here. I'm going to hand it over to Gavin. Thanks so much, and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you very much, Ethan, for that introduction. I've really been in awe of Ethan and all Ethos and what they've done for quite a while now, and that's how I got involved with data. Both of us are nerds in this field because we use the term experiential design on a daily basis. And I know everyone else here that's attending this event is passionate about this as well. So I appreciate that and everything that we've done. I wanted to touch a little bit more on how we got here into the space that we are sharing now. When we got into early 2020 and we're thinking about what are some tangible things, some concrete impacts that we could do as a nonprofit, we really thought about what's important right now, and it really seemed like the opportunity for education and arts was in the virtual space. And so we really set out into researching what you see here today, which is using tools and techniques like the spatialized audio, the fact that you can walk up to somebody and you hear them, you walk away, and you hear different people. So we searched everything from Second Life into other Unreal Engine type spaces to really land here where we are today with multiple campuses, spaces like this amphitheater. We really think this is just the beginning, and Ethos has done a great job of building out the space that we have here, and we'll be working on the further development of it as a campus and a place where people can collaborate in the years to come. And so we welcome you here. This is our first event. It's a beta of what we can do in this type of space. So in that way, it's sort of meta because we are both talking about how to use these spaces and using it for the first time. So I think that's very special, and I appreciate everyone attending here and your engagement. So as we move into the presentation, I welcome you to use the different tools, and such as clapping or raising your hand as we get through questions and answers. So without further ado, I will move on into the introduction for our panelists, because we're all here today because we believe technology should empower people and improve lives. And the people we've gathered here for this panel discussion are just an incredible group who are leaders in this field. So if you would, I will introduce each person as they come up, and if you can turn on your camera and introduce yourself as we go through. So I will step off the stage, and first off we have Rosario. So if you would come on up. She specializes in ed tech and augmented humans, and has multiple accolades of influence, including the 100 World Disruptors in New York City, and the legendary Women 2020 by Ford Motor Company. So comes very highly recommended and is an expert in this field. Rosario, do you want to say a couple words of introducing yourself?
Thank you. Yes, no, thank you for everything. I really think this is the future and the present already, but we need to help all the people who is not yet here to help us build amazing environments, help us build functionalities, and that's basically where I allocate my time between being a mentor, an entrepreneur, and a community builder. Thank you.
Thanks. And next up we have Christopher Lafayette, if you would come on up to the stage as well. He is an emergent technologist and is founder of the Black Technology Mentorship Program, which is really working for a more equitable future in technology, which is another thing we have been focused on as a mission for data for quite some time. And then also he's basically the Silicon Valley national and international speaker on this topic. And he is probably one of the top podcasts for all things XR, which you should definitely check out and follow after this. Let's see, Chris, are you able to turn on your camera for this one? And introduce yourself a little bit? I think you might be muted, unfortunately.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Hi, everyone. It's terrific to be here. Certainly to share stage with a panel of experts and those who I legitimately call friends that I've known for some time. I'm very excited about this discussion. And it's a necessary discussion because what I believe, and we'll share, but I firmly believe and know and understand that if we're going to build the metaverse, you cannot have a metaverse without meta people, and education is the vertical path towards this. So I'm very excited to share, but more importantly, I'm excited to listen.
Great. Well, thank you. And then third, we have with us also Karen Alexander coming from Pittsburgh. And if you would come on up to the stage as well. She is the director of XR Connect Ed and is a consulting that specialized in educational presentations about how XR could be used in various sectors. And she also has a PhD and has a background in higher education. So she is one of the people who's going to present with us today. Are you able to turn your camera on and give us a little intro yourself?
And now my microphone is on too. Yes. Hi. Yeah, I'm really thrilled to be here today for a number of reasons. I do love this topic. I think it's really important that we talk about the future of digital technologies in education. But I also am glad to be here with Ethan Bach and to be at an event that is put on by Data, because I worked with Data for a while back in 2016, and it's really exciting to see the direction that it's taken, the way it's growing. And it's lovely to be here with Chris and Rosario, who I've known for a while too. And so I'm excited and looking forward to hear what everyone has to say and to exchange some ideas on this super important topic.
All right. Well, thanks, Karen. And then fourth, we also have Hassa, who is joining us as a panelist. She is a fellow Data board member, but she is also the co-host and creator of Twinfold Media, which curates and licenses educational content to companies, NGOs, and institutions of higher ed. She's also just basically an all-around global ed tech professional, and had also founded an educational nonprofit that had empowered underserved youth, over 20,000 people in the US, Cameroon, the Gambia, Namibia, and South Africa. So very impressive outreach and passion that I think we can all appreciate. Hassa, if you can turn on your camera too and just say a few words.
Can you all see me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I have my camera on. Can you see me now?
No, not yet. It may just be like permissions on your computer. So, but why don't you go ahead and just say a few words on your.
Excellent. Thank you all for having me today. I'm really excited about this conversation because I think that we are in a very exploratory time right now in education, and this discussion allows us to explore and start to think about how we want to design education moving forward in the future. And virtual education, metaverses, immersive technology is a resource that could help shape our learning environments, our learning experiences going forward. And it's just a pleasure. I've had the pleasure of working with Gavin and Ethan as a board member of Data, and I've had the pleasure of speaking and learning so much about immersive technology from many of the panelists today. So without further ado, let's get started. We have a great discussion.
Thank you. So I guess if you figured it out already, you should have some options if you're sitting down. So why don't we give a round of applause for all of our panelists joining today. Those are your interactive buttons there on the left of your screen. Thank you. All right. Well, the panelists then, if you have a camera available, go ahead and turn it on, and we can see you all together up on the screen. Should form into there you go. Got everyone now. So we'll move on to some kind of focused questions for today. This will be focused on the input from our panelists, and then once we go through that, we'll open it up to Q&A for the audience, and hopefully come up to some bright and brilliant conversations. So I'll start off with a good general question. So why is virtual education so important right now to this audience, the people that are here today?
Yeah, well, I can start if no one else wants to. So obviously we're in a period of great change. There's been a lot of disruption, and that creates opportunity. The pandemic is one of the big drivers of the change. And Christopher, you and I spoke recently, and the plague was mentioned, but I recently listened to a 24 lecture series on the Black Death, the plague back in the 14th century, which killed half the population in Europe. And the series talked a lot about the social change and the changes that resulted from that. It had a huge societal impact. And while we may not be seeing those same death rates, I think that this is another instance of a pandemic that is leading to a lot of different ways of doing things in society, and so it does allow for some opportunity. But of course, there are other sorts of social changes going on, and there are technological changes. And I do believe that technological tools provide for opportunity. So I will leave it at that.
Well, I love that, Karen. Haza, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Karen was saying. I think during this pandemic, we have definitely been able to see that through remote learning, there are two things that are essential in education, right? There's the student-teacher interaction and engagement, and the peer student-to-student engagement. And the pandemic has really shone a light on that. And I think that virtual learning and virtual education is a way for us to kind of address those gaps that we see with just remote learning via Zoom or via some type of video conferencing. In this world that we're in right now, it makes it more flexible. It makes education more flexible. It makes education more accessible. But more importantly, it makes it more actionable, right? It allows us to move. It allows us to hear, feel in a way what we're learning, the content that's being presented to us in a more real way. And that's why I think virtual education is really important.
I love that. And I would love to add two things. One is that, for sure, curiosity is one of the key things, the key skills that every child should have in the near future. Also every adult, but it's difficult to start with the adults first. Then all these environments, all this new technology increases the possibility to experience by curiosity, to learn by curiosity, to check that if I tag something, if I move my mouse, I can experience something different. And that can be a huge opportunity for education, but also data analytics. For me, it is completely unbelievable that advertising can give you a personalized, hyper-located experience in advertising for brands, but not for education. Then I have the personal challenge, and of course, being surrounded with all of you, for me, is a pleasure and an honor, because you are also behind this same curiosity, and is how we can really understand the way that a person can learn better, can connect with their interest better, and how we can use that data not to sell them, only to sell them things, but also to create a more personal experience, because everybody learns in a different way. And with the current technology, it is completely possible to create educational systems that are hyper-personalized.
Just to piggyback on everything that's been expressed, one, I wholeheartedly concur. And two, look at where we're at right now, this very moment. We have representation from all over the place right now, this very second as we yet speak. By way of how we manifest ourselves at this conference is a clear indicator of why this is so important for education today. when I take a look and look at the 40,000 foot view, what's terrific about this opportunity is that I'm no longer, and our children, our K through 12 and adults, are no longer subjected to location bias. That means I can get an education from any professor and teacher around the world. I can meet with other students and peers, not just in my native home city, but that I can connect with people from Pittsburgh or Atlanta or South America or elsewhere in North America, from the East Coast to the West Coast, from the Rust Belt to the Bible Belt, to the Western region, the corridor. I collaborate and build and get a wider and much more broader sense of education. So now that we find ourselves, and look, we've become more virtual in the past year and a half than we have the last 10. And these tools and technology that we're utilizing today, and look, we were all forced into a use case experiment and everyone had to participate this last 18 months. And what we've come to find out on the other side, and what we're not going back to, is now that we know that we can be more productive or even more productive remotely and virtually than we have through typical standards that for some are hard to let go to this day, but for many, we're not going back. And so education is a very appropriate subject at hand.
Absolutely. And that does bring to mind kind of the other question I had. You know, we're all looking forward to the future now. Here we are in this space. But we really suffered for almost the last 2 years now in sort of a funky hybrid zone, like we said, Chris, with people getting stuck in the old ways of doing things. So I'd like to hear just briefly from each of you, what would you say is the worst virtual experience you've had to suffer through in the last year and a half or so? You know, the things that are the pet peeves that you hope never happen again, that we really learn a lesson from.
I think for me, the worst experience you could have in virtual education is not having an experience. We are still trying to achieve equity. And as you know, during this pandemic, some people were able to improve their educational opportunities and others lost a lot of their educational opportunities. So I feel that for those who don't have internet connectivity, who don't have computers or some type of access to the internet, they lose out on these types of experiences. So we as leaders, as education technologists, as people in this immersive space, we have to find ways in which to use some of this technology and some of these opportunities and make sure that it's inclusive to everyone. And I think this is a perfect example, making sure that this is a web browser-based forum for all of us to join. That's the first step to make sure that as many people can take part in this virtual experience as possible.
Maybe I will add something interesting there, and is that educators are like the real world shapers, are the real people who is building the future of our of our world. And if they don't have the tools and they don't have the volunteer to learn these new technologies, we will be leaving a lot of kids behind. Then the way that all of you from different projects and perspectives are connecting the kids with the teachers, with the educational system, and creating the need of having the educators in the edge of the understanding of the technology. I really think that that's very important. Otherwise, we will be creating a mess. You know, educators who don't want to change or learn new things because they are comfortable, that doesn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic completely underlined that moment or that situation.
Yeah.
Great.
I can speak to. I have something maybe a bit more prosaic to say in terms of my worst experience, and to take it down. These are very beautiful, high-level thoughts and really important ones. Absolutely, it's there. The digital divide is real, and we need to make sure that we can get tools and connectivity into the hands of the children that we're trying to educate, the children and adults, not just children. And yes. The whole education system needs to change. But I think we're going to talk more about that later. But in terms of the worst experience I had, one was in an event that I had jointly organized. And it was when we had unexpectedly had some additional guests, and they were trying to do something that didn't work very well, and that we had tried to convey that information, and it was a disaster. So we knew the limitations of the particular platform that we were using, but these guests didn't really understand that, and so it did not go well at all. And of course, anytime you're in a virtual platform, there are going to be little glitches and things that don't work well. I think we all understand that and expect that at this point, right? And it will continue to get better. These platforms will improve, and we'll all learn how to operate them better too. But the other worst experience I've had in the past, I don't know what you said, year and a half or 2 years, was when a member of my XR Women community, who I had recommended to speak at an event in a virtual world, was there, and I was in attendance, and she was the only woman on a panel of 3 men, and there were also the people who were putting it on were men, and there was a troll there, and she was subjected to some really, really horrible sexual harassment. I mean, it was really bad. It was shocking, really, and unfortunately, this person got kicked out. They came back. They repeated what they had said using her name, and it was horrific. And so that sort of thing still does happen. I think that I'm fortunate most of the time when I'm in virtual worlds, it's at curated events and for things like discussing education or in educational context. But yeah, that was really, really kind of hard to see, and it was a reminder that that sort of thing still does go on.
Yeah, there is the phenomenon of meanness in the internet in general, that people don't curb their behavior as much as they would in person, and some of that does pervade into the virtual space, unfortunately. So I guess on that note, where are we getting protections for this? Like, where does an educator get sense of best practices? There's been all sorts of wild stories that we've heard. I remember Ethan was telling me his kids were in a class, and he was just shocked at this weird timer function that they had, that they were basically trying to micromanage everything they did and get them offline and online, and it was just like very hectic. And I'm just wondering, where are people getting these ideas, or is it just the Wild West for a while? So maybe if you have any ideas of where you've seen people learn best practices, and where do you think we need to go to get to a better place that has protections against these kind of issues?
Well, if I can, I think this is a very critical topic, because we need to go back a little. We need to go back to product delivery teams. We need to go and speak to the adage that maybe to consider that we need to hire the people that we want to buy and experience our product. When I think about the development of virtual worlds and virtual learning environments and spaces, what I've seen so much of are groups, predominantly male-centric developers, that have an idea to build platforms for us. And they build these platforms, and nobody where I come from helped create it, men and women alike, and people that look like me didn't help create it. But for some reason, they believe that I'll enjoy this experience based on their limited experience of cultural development. What am I getting at? We don't build virtual worlds and installations to bring people into. It's better off to develop community and build our environments around that. And what you'll come to find out is that you'll have multiple input instead of a monocultural development. It'll be a polycultural development. In other words, we have to get to the place where we're not looking at ecosystems as hardware and software and ideas, but ecosystems are people. When we build from human centricity, what we come to find out is we're going to have a much more enjoyable experience. There's going to be better accessibility. There's going to be better use cases for democratized access. And the education that's going to be distributed and developed is going to feel inclusive for all because it's identifiable, because it's built by people that come from where they come from. In other words, when we look at the market ecosystem level up and we look at the importance of education, education is the one vertical of any vertical in XR that benefits the whole entire installation construct of intended practices for humanity use case. It cannot be built by a few. It must be built by all in order for us to be successful with its outcome.
I think Chris has said a lot of importance. I just want to add to what he has said so passionately. I think to build and make sure that we're building these types of communities that we want to see in this type of space, we need to also give ourselves a little bit of grace and remember that we are at the infancy of this type of technology in education. So like Chris said, we need to draw on many different sectors to learn about best practices. We know that this type of technology has been in the gaming world for a long time. So looking there and understanding what works and what doesn't work. Also looking at education sector and looking at what has worked traditionally in traditional education and seeing what can work in an XR type space. Also looking to the law and making sure that we have privacy and safety protocols and regulations in place as we tend to grow and reshape education with XR being integrated into that. So I think it's going to take, like Chris said, everyone to make sure that we're safe, to make sure that we're best practices that are global and inclusive for everyone.
I would also love to touch back the point of the educators, because in many cases this technology is fascinating enough. Then in many cases the development teams prefer to be in the frontier of the technology, the super cool gadgets, but they are not thinking what is possible in the classroom, of what is possible in some regions. And I will talk as a Latin American native. And of course, one thing is what you can develop for the New York market and the New York schools, and also because almost, a smartphone is a regular thing. But when you are Latin American, you are trying to lead this industry, and you want to develop projects, you need to think in what is feasible, the usability of the communities. the real need of bandwidth, no matter if it is the fanciest thing or not, because that's the only way where we can showcase the possible success of these technologies and the impact before just being in a fashion thing, in a fashion way. Because the reality is, and I will give you an example, we were working with educators in the classroom in different geographies. And in Astoria, in Queens, in New York, we were developing a project with girls in a school. And we were working with paper because we were learning how to create stories considering the 360 environment, not only my perspective, but how I can start creating narratives to include all the others' points of views. But and that was working very well. And the professor, because of course they were using some technology already. But when I came, or when I went to a Latin American school or to some Latin American developers, they were like, no, I will not work in paper because that doesn't sound interesting. And the reality is that storytelling, usability, the human behind these technologies, the human who will be improved, or whose life will be improved by the use of this technology, must be our center. Not the technology or the fancy thing on this technology or the last headset, but how really understanding the perspective of every other point of view, it is what is required in this technology, how we can use that to create really a better way to educate, a better way to create communication, and a better way to create communities and to empower communities.
Yeah, that's really powerful. It almost sounds like the opportunity is the challenge. Like what Chris was saying, like now I can reach everyone, I can talk to everyone in the world. But the challenge for that is, how do you include everyone? How do you make sure it's for everyone? And so I think, we spent a lot of time as data looking at the technology and trying to get this space up and running and working with all Ethos, and they've done fantastic work. But the real challenge, I think, for everyone here is thinking about the human-centric nature of it, because we are here now. So how to make the most of it. I think we have some more questions I'd love to go over, but I think it'd be good at this point to open it up to the audience and just kind of really expand on this vision that we are starting to explore. A vision that includes everyone, a vision that makes more things possible. So I would open it up. So everyone in the audience, if you notice kind of where you can mute and unmute your microphone at the top center, there's a little hand icon. You can see that on my hand right now. If you have a question, let's just kind of open up the floor and raise your hand and I'll call on you. Any questions right there? Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, I would like to know about what funding mechanisms or opportunities or grants, or how does the financial part of the equation deal with education and immersive worlds?
Well, that's an important question, and I think that one of the things that those of us who know about XR technologies, who know about virtual worlds and possibilities are, is that we need to be advocating to people in government positions who often hold the purse strings for education, right? And make sure that they understand the importance of funding the placement of these kinds of tools and the right kind of connectivity in the schools, and making sure that children have access to them. And even things like, like citywide free Wi-Fi, something like that is, can be so important, because let's face it, it's a global problem, the access to connectivity. I mean, here in the US, there are plenty of places where people don't have access to broadband internet or even very good cellular service. And of course, that's the case in many places around the world. but we have to convince our elected officials of the importance of this, and that this is the future that we must fund for our children. And that's one place where this funding needs to come from, and probably the most important one. You know, we can't always rely on foundations and grantors to fund these sorts of initiatives. It needs to be integrated into our educational system.
I think just to add to that, there are governments right now that are funding virtual education. For example, you have Seoul, Korea. Their city education system has just rolled out virtual education science classroom for elementary and middle school students. So there are governments that are already funding this type of education. And I think that over time, we'll start to see more and more government funding going towards immersive technology in education so that we can create this virtual education atmosphere. In addition to that, we do have a few venture capital firms that have now found a lot of interest in the ed tech and XR space, particularly in education. So there is funding out there, and I expect it to grow in the years to come.
Well, I will add that, of course, education is, it was always important, but it will play a very critical role in the near future because the technologies and the industries and the environment is changing quicker and quicker every day. Then the regular process that we use since the Middle Age to educate people will not work anymore. That way, we should start thinking in a different way, not only how we educate people, how we create the ecosystem of education, but also how we can make it a very good business model. Why? Because, of course, if not, every industry will die. There is no other question. If education was important in the past, it will be critical in the near future. It is already critical. We already have a huge gap in many different industries because of the lack of people with the correct training or education. Then I really think that many industries will, I know this group will be involved in it because I heard each one of you since we already know each other since more than 4 or 5 years. And I know we are all thinking on how to make this and make education a good business for everybody. Then I really think that the regular way of financing today is grants and is the educational systems but we can't, or the industries can't keep education depending on politicians everywhere in the world. That's what I think.
And I would piggyback on that. I would just submit that I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with everything that's been expressed. And I'm not surprised to hear those remarks from the panelists that I share stage with. Permit me to add a little bit of pepper to this, because that was a great question that was asked of us. When it comes to the metaverse, we need to understand that you can't buy the metaverse. You have to grow it. And when we talk about education and traditional business models for funding, whether that's through seed and Series A, even all the way to acquisition, I believe that we have to take a different look in our approach to how we actually fund education and virtual education today. Why do I say this? When we look at the world today of investment capital for products and platforms and applications, we already have such a major crisis happening with who's allotted the type of deal flow and dollars of investment of these terrific ideas. Even on the governmental level for public dollar distribution. The metaverse itself, originally in its construct, is designed to be an open source system, not closed and walled garden environment. And when we look at this under the banner of education, here's what's intimidating. That my children, who I don't have, but my children, our children, may find themselves in a virtual environment whose curriculum is developed by privatized dollars that have not taken full advantage of the biggest gain for virtual education, which is the marriage pairing between the technologist and the teacher. Let me be very specific on what I'm about to say here. If there's anything that you get from anything that I express, the biggest asset to virtual education is the mind of the teacher. It is incumbent upon us as technologists to take the lower road and submit ourselves to our educational teachers who hold the information, who guide our children these days, and to get them where they need to go. As a technologist, I should be supporting our teachers in any way that I can and taking their ideas instead of thinking that my ideas are going to be better in the comparison of a teacher. And so when we build educational and virtual education platforms, quite frankly, they need to be developed and built by our teachers and not our technologists. Our technologists are guides and ushers towards bringing in those who undoubtedly know how to do and build it better. Then we will find better use cases for financing.
Go ahead.
No, I agree on many ways, Christopher. But I also think that we do have a challenge in that, teachers are overworked and stressed out. They have a lot on their plates, and many of them don't have time to learn about these new technologies and to take the time to conceptualize how they can transform what they're teaching. I think teachers are undervalued in our society, and that we need to provide them with more support and resources. And yes, we need to take advantage of their expertise, but we also need to empower them and expose them to technological tools so that they can learn how to apply their expertise via these tools. It's a challenge.
I so agree with that. In fact, I'm glad you shared that. I'm meeting with my alma mater tomorrow of high school that I graduated so that I can start working with them to do exactly what you just said. I 100% in agreement with that, Karen. We have to teach. I mean, and since you said that, I think that's so appropriate just to say this, is that we still haven't really done a good job in explaining what virtual and augmented reality is to the public itself. I mean, when you go up to a person that's not in our space and say, hey, do you know what virtual reality is? And they say, isn't that a 90s video game? I think that I submit that I believe that we could do a little bit better overall in even teaching people what this is and not misleading on, the grandiose of the metaverse when we haven't even agreed on colloquial acronym usage for how we even define our education. So, Karen, I'm so right there with you on that.
Maybe I will also add that education should not be any more a system per se, but it should be more integrated in the other areas of the society. And I will give an example of something that for me was life changing. When I moved to New York and I saw the environment of interaction between private companies, universities, startups, and how I, or myself as an entrepreneur, I was able to attend the meetings, use the university facilities, went to the art labs in New York and so forth. But when you see countries like Colombia, my native country, and you see that all of those ecosystems, they are not even connected between them. Then there are like small powers who are not talking, and then the creation of ecosystems is very complex. It's very difficult, and in that way, if you want to include also the educational, the regular, the traditional educational system, it will be completely impossible. Then basically what we need to start doing is creating bridges between the regions, because also what you already learned in one region of the world, you can like share and see what can be replicated. I always try to be like a creator of connections between geographies, but also between sectors, because XR Americas will never be what we are if not being in the middle of the ecosystem of the universities. I mean, and being able to use the facilities and the equipment and the things in the universities. Then that conversation between systems, and of course, if we want to include the schools, K-12 and so, that implies a huge challenge. But for sure, connecting the places, connecting the people, connecting the different perspectives is a starting point. And for sure, what you all are doing, but Chris, what you are building always, connecting people from different environments, is really, really adding value.
Right. Well, thank you all for that, and for that great question, Julian. As we think about how to fund it and where, not just how to fund it, but where the funding should go, and back into teachers and into the communities. I think we still have time for a couple more questions. Does anyone else have a question? If you would just raise your hand.
Is it possible for me to make a quick comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just sitting here thinking as I was listening to Rosario share, and I marvel again. I'm just fascinated to be on this stage and to look at Karen and Rosario and Hasanata, who I've known for years, as Rosario said. It's like, my goodness. And I'm sitting here thinking about how enjoyable this is while we have avatars on the stage and video on the screen. It takes me back to a recent publication by Geraldine Favell, and she comes to us from Europe. And she wrote a really fascinating article, and she's an XR technologist, and she wrote an article on Zoom fatigue. And I know that some people will ask, and I'm sure my co-panelists would agree, that there's, why go into XR as opposed to going or being in Zoom? And I just, by the mere fact that I'm not just staring at someone's forehead while we're having this discussion and talking, and I'm able to look around. I was flying in this platform today before we got on stage. I don't remember any other time that I actually was flying before I got on anyone else's stage. And so what I'm really getting into is that it's expansive environmental fidelity for people to come in and to explore and to unlock that inner curiosity. I don't know how my other co-panelists feel about that.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, and of course, there was, after you were flying, Christopher, there was a moment when you and I were standing on a table together in this world taking selfies, and so which was a lot of fun. But yeah, there is something really different about virtual worlds, that sense of sharing space with people, getting to move around and view the world and people from different angles, and to interact with them through, in some cases, waving at them across the room, virtual hugs, handshakes with some sort of haptic feedback. That sense of being in a space with other people really does make a difference. And, that's an important part of what we're doing here and of being in these spaces.
Yeah, and those are all the lessons learned from museums for many years in terms of using immersion, whether it's a dome theater or classic 90s headsets, is that you are experiencing something more. If you're at a field trip, if you're traveling, your senses are heightened and your learning is different. It's kind of back to what I was saying earlier about learning through curiosity and like how important skill that is. it is a different space. Do you have any other audience questions to kind of keep this conversation going?
And maybe I will add the invitation to each one of you to invite other people from your professional environment who will never try these platforms before to start trying. Let's coordinate a coffee, virtual coffee, a tea, a discussion. Start using these technologies in within your organizations, because that's the only way we will understand better how to take advantage of this to do even more, to have more impact on the real needs of people.
And I also think that, to piggyback on what Rosario said, is that the more people are involved and are participating in virtual education and virtual worlds and metaverses, the better the content is. And I think that we'll start to see content that is relevant, content that is culturally representative, content that's geographically representative of ourselves, the more we talk. I know that XR and virtual education has been big for a long time in the health space and medicine. So, and the more and more it's been used, the better it's gotten. And I think that it's just so much room to grow here. And this is our time to really embrace it and shape it the way we want it to be.
All right. Julianne was just reminding us we're kind of getting close to time. I want to thank everyone again for presenting and being part of this great panel discussion. I'd like to invite Ethan back up to kind of close us out for the day. So thanks again, everyone. Ethan, where are you? Are you able to, there you go.
So one thing is if I can get the speakers to go ahead and turn your video off here, and then I can jump on stage. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks again to our wonderful speakers. Go ahead and give them a round of applause. Great. Thank you so much again for everyone coming. So I just wanted to share a couple more things before we jump off here. We do have some time to network and hang out and have more discussions after we step off stage here. This has been brought to you by the Denver Arts and Technology Advancement Board and sponsored by Ethos. We thank you to our sponsor for providing us a space. This will be a space where we can learn and grow, and Data plans on holding classrooms here and holding our digital dome workshops and all kinds of things here. This is just a first iteration of what we're looking at. This is kind of the next iteration of what we're looking at. And yes, we did borrow this from Shutterstock, but we love this like futuristic look of and feel of the space. And because we do domes as well, we can have these breakout rooms, and then we can have domes on top of these spaces that'll allow us to be able to do 360 education in those worlds. So this is something that we're working on currently with Ethos to build out for us. We're really glad for the space we have today, though. It's really awesome. And I wanted to reach out and just say, you know, if you're interested in helping out with Data, we are looking for some board members, and if you want to host an event in this space, let us know. If you want to become a sponsor of these sort of talks, we're going to keep doing these talks and keep providing information for everyone. But again, just such a great topic. We're so happy that everyone was here, and let's do another round of applause for our speakers, and then let's go ahead and we can all like stand up, stretch our arms, and turn on our mics and have a little more social time.